We're gonna do this again, this time for sure. So I technically already recorded this entire script once already, but the audio was completely worthless, so I'm gonna do it again. And look, I'm not getting paid for making these videos. I'm not a thespian, and I'm not a professional. I just have my script right here, so I'm just gonna read off of it. I don't have enough incentive to memorize lines yet. Sorry. My last video essay that I made had a bit too much I have a creative writing degree energy to it, and I personally don't want to pigeonhole myself into a certain tone of voice yet, so I'm gonna experiment with this video a little bit, because this video does still cover some stuff that I talked about in my previous video, but it's my channel, I can do what I want. The topic that we're gonna talk about is cosmic horror, my personal favorite brand of horror. You have things like The Void, the movie, the Southern Reach trilogy, Bloodborne, and of course, Call of Cthulhu, both the short story and the video games. All of these hold a special place in my heart, and I find myself drawn back to them every so often, just to briefly peek at it again and see if my mind shatters like glass against the weight of the unknowable. It doesn't, thankfully, but that got me thinking. Isn't the big selling point of Lovecraftian horror the mind-shatteringly cosmic revelation? Isn't cosmic horror all about the realization that we, as humans and individuals, are so finite and small that we cannot possibly comprehend the galaxy-spanning wills and bodies of things described in some of Hates Progress's work? There's an infamous tweet that very succinctly summarizes my feelings on the issue of Lovecraftian elder gods and the typical cosmic horror experience. Now, I want to dissect this tweet and what it implies about the genre and what it means for me personally, because I think this tweet taps into something that no one else has really uncovered about cosmic horror, except for me. Yes, you heard it here first. I am declaring it here and now. I'm the only one who understands cosmic horror. Eat your heart out, English majors and literature fiends. I, the mathematics major, am the expert here, and of course this means I am going to do this in a completely reasonable and appropriate amount of time. Don't look at the time code. Now, it's important to establish a few things. The first and foremost is why I'm doing this. Well, one, because I want to, and two, honestly, cosmic horror does a really cool thing that I don't think other brands of horror do. Cosmic horror asserts that we as people don't matter, and asserts that the things we live for and exist because of are too small. But whether or not you agree with that is irrelevant, because it asserts this claim. So you reflexively start to think about it, and you start to judge about whether you are doing something you enjoy, or whether the things you make are worth anything, and how they fit into a grand, uncaring cosmos. It's interesting. The idea of it is interesting, and I find a lot of compelling thought behind it. So, regardless of whether cosmic horror is not the most popular, like, subgenre of horror, or whether people like this video enough to watch it, I'm gonna make this video because it means a lot to me, and I think that there's merit in that. And also because it's my channel, I can do what I want. I already said it, I said it again. But to talk about this, we have to start from the beginning, and I mean the beginning. Part 0. What even is horror? Yes, dear viewer, we have arrived at the level of, oh god, how deep is this going to go? And I've got great news. We'll go even deeper. Very, very soon. Don't look at the time code. We will go even deeper. The term art horror was coined by Noel Carroll, whom I will reference so much in this video that I might as well put a citation at the end of every other sentence. Put simply, art horror is the horror made to be consumed by us weird horror aficionados. Art horror differs from actual horror, which would be something dark and macabre and very, very real, like the horrors of war, or some type of global tragedy going on right now. In Noel Carroll's book, The Philosophy of Horror, he examines art horror as a genre. In so doing, he points out My cat is attacking me. In Noel Carroll's book, The Philosophy of Horror, he examines art horror as a genre. In so doing, he points out the necessity of a monster in horror by stating, monsters are the mark of horror. I would posit that having a monstrous creature is what facilitates the delineation between subgenres like thriller and psychological thriller and mystery, and then horror. Art horror as a genre, which I will now be referring to simply as horror to stop from bloating my word count and feeling good about how much I wrote, is defined by its antagonist. What you'll notice about most horror media is that there's a very specific thing that is horrific. It's almost always some kind of creature, a freaky or gross or uncanny thing, be it a location like a haunted house, or some kind of person like Dracula. Carroll outlines these monsters in 5 broad categories, creating a sort of taxonomy of monsters. These categories are fusion, fission, magnification, massification, and metonymy. These have been collectively renamed into way better and way more accessible names, which are, in the same order, the Chimera, the Doppelganger, the Giant, the Swarm, and the Uncanny. God, that sounds so much better, doesn't it? Doesn't that sound great? The Chimera, the fusion monster, is actually secretly 2 monsters that live in 2 states at once. Zombies, as an example, are both alive and dead. The name Chimera on its own is a pretty strong indication of what types of creatures you'd find in this category. The Doppelganger, or fission monster, is a bit more complex. This is a creature that is 2 things, but not at the same time. See werewolves. These creatures typically have some sort of transformation or shift where they go from non-monstrous into monstrous, either by moonlight or strong emotion or some other stimulus of some kind. To be honest, I'm not entirely compelled by the name Doppelganger for this as a category, but I can't think of a better one, so I mean, hey, if you can, just throw it in the comments. Maybe you'll get famous and published. The Giant, or Magnification, is a monster that is just really, really big. Like, really big. Take any mundane or seemingly deal-withable thing and magnify it to the point of incredibly horrifying and problem-causing, i.e. spiders, or ants, or sometimes women. I think women are just scary. However, we're going to come back to this one. Magnification has some interesting consequences that I'd like to revisit. Next, we have the Swarm, or the Massification. Massification doesn't sound like a real word, but it is, at least with this context it is. Massification is the same sort of thing as magnification, except instead of making one thing huge, you make one thing into 1,000 things, or even more, even 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 things. You take one small creature and multiply it by so much that eventually it becomes a horrifying thing to deal with. In the PBS Idea Channel video that covers the taxonomy of monsters, he actually makes the compelling case about 1 piranha versus 1,000 piranhas. There's something to be said about a well-organized collection of individuals operating for the group as a whole that strike fear into the few and power-hungry. But I don't know. Lastly, we have the Uncanny, or the Metonymy. This is my personal favorite for reasons that we'll get into later. But the weird and opaque feeling of the Metonymy is what is the hallmark of this one. A thing that is almost exclusively human-shaped, primarily because this category demands the creature hide a majority of its nature. It can't look like a monster, at least not right away, such that the feeling of unease begins to swell in the background. A common touchstone for this archetype is the goat himself, Dracula, a charming and debonair gentleman with an unsettling and menacing aura about him. Nothing about his appearance is immediately threatening, at least not right away, save the nervous hairs on your neck standing on end. Now, I hear what you're saying. But Joe, you say, not all horror involves a monster. And to that I say, make your own video. But for my video, I will hear you out. Say, for example, you have a point imaginary person that I made up for this segue, and let's examine a piece of media and see if we can't find the monster where there apparently isn't one. Take, for instance, Midsommar, the Ari Aster film. Ari Aster in this movie depicts an emotionally vulnerable main character, Danny, who is taken in by a cult, the Harga. I don't think it does this movie any kind of disservice to classify it as psychological thriller instead of horror, but let's see if we can categorize it as horror and subsequently find a monster within it, just for fun. Ultimately, the horror of the story is the slow ensnaring of Danny by the cult. I think it's an easy argument to make to name the cult itself as the monster of this film. According to Carroll, monsters in horror need to do two specific things. They need to be life-threatening, though it need not be explicitly physical harm done by the monster, and they need to be disgusting or repulsive or revolting, shattering the established norm of acceptable behavior and easy to observe. The cult in this case fits well into both of these requirements, as the cult violates acceptable norms by being both anti-immigrant isolationists and incredibly racist towards non-white outsiders, as well as being life-threatening again because of the overt racism, as well as the poisoning of food for the newcomers and the burning of the house and just the rest of the stuff that happens to Danny's friends. Make no mistake, the friends here are dead because of this cult. And to the pedants who say, oh, well, the friends of Danny all wronged the cult in some way. Yeah, sure, but when's the last time you wronged someone and they murdered you? However, if we are to classify this movie as horror via Carroll's analysis, and thus declare the cult as the monster, then where does the cult fit into the taxonomy of monsters we just outlined? Well, the movie does a wonderfully good job of putting the disturbing vibe in and around the cult. I would firmly plant them into the metonymy or the uncanny. Alternatively, the cult's members far outnumber the number of protagonists in our story, so we could easily place them into massification, but I think it's not quite right. There's something about the vibe that just doesn't feel good about naming them as a swarm as opposed to an uncanny force. There's a great video essay that Kay and Skittles does that goes into more detail about the nuances of this movie that's somewhat related to what I'm talking about. You should watch it. It's just a great essay. I'd love to dive deeper into the specifics of what makes something horror, but that goes well beyond the scope of this particular video, so I hope you'll accept this brief foray into the framework to sort of lay the groundwork for further analysis of cosmic horror. This primarily shows that our categories for both the nature of monsters as well as the qualities and qualifications of horror are flexible. For the purposes of this essay, I'm going to assume that any horror media must therefore have some horrifying monster or malign force which act as a vehicle to deliver the horror to us as viewers. I'd love to get more nuanced and nitpicky about it, but God, I just want to finish this script and video sometime this year, and this is the only way to do it. Okay, great. Now that we understand horror and monsters and the flexible ways in which the two can shift and interact, we can get to our Squid Man, Cthulhu, an actual cosmic horror entity, and we can take our very good, very rigorous framework of the Carrollian taxonomy of monsters and apply it directly to cosmic horror. Part 1. What is cosmic horror, and why do people like it? Cosmic horror is broadly misunderstood by everyone except for me. There are things about the genre that people latch onto, elements or facets of it that stick out, but I believe people look at these things and label them as cosmic horror instead of what those facets and elements are attached to. Kind of like tentacles, slithering out from some nebulous dark form. This is a prime example of my point, actually. Tentacles are one of the most ubiquitous pop culture signifiers of Lovecraftian and or cosmic horror as a whole. Just ask any layperson or hardcore fan. Cthulhu has tentacles. Shoggoths have tentacles. Elder things have tentacles. It's all fucking tentacles, man. Tentacles on their own, however, are not cosmic horror. Though they pop up all over the place within the genre, now a layperson might think, well, yeah, cosmic horror is when the squid is in space. No. But to a really hardcore aficionado of the genre, they would be able to point out that, no, those aren't all of it. They're just part of it. So that leads me to ask, if tentacles aren't actual cosmic horror, but are just merely a part of it, then what is? What is cosmic horror? There's an excellent, very researched analysis by the Polymath Paradise on YouTube that goes hard as fuck in a very accessibly short amount of time on the specifics of cosmic horror, and you should definitely check that out as well. as I'll be referencing bits from it later on and throughout the next couple parts of this essay. Now, for the uninitiated, cosmic horror has been analyzed to death by hundreds of thousands of other essayists and researchers and whatnot. And the common core principle that seems to emerge from all of these various places is cosmic insignificance. This idea boils down to being nothing. You, your family, everyone you know, everyone who came before you, everyone who could come after you, all of humanity, from the most influential thought leaders to the most SoundCloud rapper, all of them are meaningless. We humans, and humanity at large, are creatures without impact and meaning. There is nothing we can do to even dent the framework of even the smallest astral bodies, most of which are so big in scope and scale we can't even fathom their size correctly. We are, we were, and we will always be nothing. Now, there's a couple of key pieces to build off from here, so let's dive just a little deeper. Now, because we're talking about horror in the Carolean sense, we have to talk about the antagonists of these cosmic horror stories. The way these creatures are depicted is immense in more ways than one. They are usually giant, sometimes planet-sized, or in some cases galaxy-spanning. They are physically huge, as well as unknowable. Indeed, you could make the argument that being so impossibly large actually contributes to their unknowable nature. Their truly massive scale is one of the bigger pieces of the puzzle in imbuing cosmic insignificance to us as enjoyers of the genre. And what better way to make us feel cosmically small than to make something cosmically massive? It's a compelling idea, a creature or thing so vast it can spread across both space and time, a scale that dwarfs moons or planets. As I just mentioned, Azathoth, one of the primary antagonists in most cosmic horror stories, dwarfs entire nebulas, and the fact that it even exists in these stories throws into question our ability to matter in the grand scheme of the universe and everything. These beings that exist within cosmic horror are typically depicted as gods, sometimes even more than gods, even more godlike than some deities which find themselves sitting on a fictitious pantheon. Take, for instance, Galarian, the setting for the Pathfinder tabletop role-playing game. There are deific pantheon beings within that story, and they can and do shape reality, but there are other things that exist far outside the scope of these gods within their pantheon, as though the Lovecraftian creatures are gods amongst the godly. Hell, even Hastur and Cthulhu and some of the other Lovecraftian heavy hitters are actually just canon in the Galarian lore. Thanks, public domain. What is a god of war to do when a creature that exists in multiple dimensions and lives at the center of your universe decides to roam onto your home turf? Wait, what are you gonna do? You gonna stab it? You're just gonna stab the blind idiot god that's bigger than, like, every planet, Gorum, you dweeb ass? Another good example of this are the Eldrazi from the Magic the Gathering collectible trading card game, trademark Wizards of the Coast 1993. There's a video by Rhystic Studies called The Blind Eternities that beautifully highlights the nature of the weirdness of such creatures, focusing on the place they originate, the Blind Eternities, and how we, in our normal way of understanding, cannot begin to grapple with them in the first place. The Eldrazi are never eradicated in a permanent way. Really, the fights are never meaningfully won, but rather survived. The Eldrazi are not something you can simply beat. They are something you live from. Of course, size isn't everything. Obviously, these creatures are rule breakers. And I don't mean in a punk rock way, though technically I do guess that they break contemporary rules of society as we shatter the minds of police and politicians alike. But no, what I mean by rule breakers here is that they bend the rules by which we understand the world around us. Indeed, another key piece to this cosmic horror puzzle. The most prominent example of this is the non-Euclidean geometry thing that Lovecraft was on. Quick aside, I was a math major in college, as I mentioned earlier, and I currently work as an engineer, so when I first started getting into Lovecraft in high school, I was really enamored with this idea of non-Euclidean space. As I learned more and I found out more about it, the actual idea of non-Euclidean geometry is so much more boring than how it appears in fiction. Never meet your heroes, I guess. Anyway, The whole space doesn't work normally here kind of vibe, the way that creatures in Lovecraft stories bend and warp the world around them, is a fantastic fictional twist. It reinforces their cosmic scale as significantly large astral bodies can and do bend space-time, but also adds a little bit of that extra eldritch spice to the mix. Physics and reality start to melt in contact with these creatures, as if the mere presence of them is damaging to the surrounding matter. It's like a type of radioactivity, one so intense that it penetrates anything, that it penetrates everything. This extends into other places that are both real and not real at the same time. Dreams. In the Hallmark story, The Call of Cthulhu, the titular man-squid is asleep far beneath the surface of the ocean, and his dreams impact the dreams of thousands of people, thousands of miles away, and he, or it, influences the creation of murder sex cults without even doing anything. Again, this reality radioactive decay burns through the fabric of time and space directly into the minds of the unsuspecting and artistic. This influence also extends into the flesh in some cases. In Arthur Machen's story, The Great God Pan, Pan himself is a deity that defies nature. The great god reshapes flesh, merging human and animal forms. In further, human and animal and insect, as categories or distinctions, are entirely lost, or more frighteningly, disregarded by the great god Pan and other similar entities. These qualities, the massive scale and the reality-bending nature, are, in my humble opinion, which is also correct, the end-all be-all hallmarks of cosmic horror. The titans of this fiction are entities which carry both of these qualities with them in their stories, as well as other hidden qualities and features that we'll talk about later. But with that introduction into cosmic horror, we can now take some of our previously gained analytical tools and categorize the Eldritch. Part 1.5. Categorizing the Eldritch. Now, said earlier, we were going to talk about our man-squid favorite friend, Cthulhu. So let's revisit him in the Carolian lens for a moment. But Joe, you say, cosmic horror isn't about the monster. You're missing the point. Cosmic horror leaves you with a deeper sense of insignificance. It's the kind of horror that keeps you up at night. It's not supposed to be just a scary monster. And to you, imaginary pedant who once again disrupts my thinking, I say, make your own video. But, more importantly, we've already discussed how horror is very dependent on an antagonist, as according to Carol. Secondly, if you were to take Cthulhu out of Call of Cthulhu, I mean, you wouldn't really have much of a story, would you? No, I dare say that cosmic horror is, in fact, predicated entirely upon the monster. While it isn't framed and weighted in the same way that a harrowing encounter with Freddy or Jason would be, an encounter with a cosmic horror entity is only mind-shattering with the existence of the otherworldly creature that lies right beneath our noses, hidden from view. But, with that out of the way, let's take a look at the Encyclopedia Britannica entry for our squid friend, Cthulhu. A monster of vagary anthropoid outline, with an octopus-like head, whose face was a mass of feelers and scaly, rubbery body, prodigious claws on hind and fore feet, and long, narrow wings behind it. It is said to be so terrible to behold that it destroys the sanity of those who see it. Now, as far as horror goes, cosmic horror is unique amongst them. Them being the monsters like slashers, werewolves, zombie outbreaks, ghosts, hauntings, etc. Where cosmic horror differs is, most notably, in the design and execution of its monsters. As we will see, cosmic horror is a genre that prides itself on its tentacle-laden creatures. But which category does this juggernaut of cosmic horror fit into? In the events of the story, Cthulhu does not transform unless you count waking up from a long slumber, a type of transformation, which some people definitely does count. But sadly, this is not enough for one Cthulhu entity to fall into the fission category of monsters. Intuitively, one would think fusion, given that Cthulhu has several animal components on his squishy anthropoid frame. I'll be honest, I don't really see this as fusion, despite Cthulhu being at least 4 distinct things, because fusion is not defined by a plurality of things, but rather a contradictory combination of things. Life and death, see undead. Innocent and villainous, see demonic possession. Animate and inanimate, see Chucky, etc. Now, barring the fact that most fusion monsters are typically a combination of 2 opposite things, the only other thing about fusion types that I've not yet really mentioned is that the fusion is central to its being. There's a clear delineation between pre-fusion and post-fusion states of existence for any fusion monster. Thus, if there's a way to unfuse the creature, the monster is typically gone. Cthulhu doesn't really fit neatly into this category once you start to peel back the layers a little bit. Now, tangent really quick, I wanted to clarify again for some of the pedants that might still be pedanting in the comments section. Demonic or ghostly possession are not fission monsters. That is, one who are 2 distinct things and transform between them. The primary reason being that the possessed are not going through a transformation where they turn into a ghost or demon, so much as the ghost or demon is acting within their body as a conduit. They occupy the same meat space, which may have a physical impact on the body, but is a distinct transformation where innocent and possessed beings and a villainous possessor ends. If you still don't believe me, then make your own video. Moving on. We can easily rule out 2 entire categories: the massification, the swarm, and the metonymy, the uncanny. Cthulhu is very clearly one distinct entity and therefore isn't and cannot be a swarm. And as for the uncanny, well, when we defined it, we recognize that creatures within the category have to maintain a quality of not immediately threatening on the surface. And, I mean, Cthulhu literally drives onlookers insane without even doing anything, which I believe is the exact opposite of both subtle and superficially unthreatening. This leaves us with magnification, or the giant. This one is difficult because the thesis behind magnification is inherently taking something that is otherwise small or seemingly disturbing and making it massive. Cthulhu has squid or octopus-like qualities, which are creatures that aren't typically massive. Making them massive, however, we end up with cultural monster superstars like the Kraken or the giant squid. And if you didn't watch The Hunt for the Giant Squid on the Discovery Channel, then I really can't understand how you made it this far into the video and recognize that we would not be friends in real life. Going further, Cthulhu only has the superficial qualities from these creatures. The tendrils. The bulbous head. He also has his freaky little bat wings and vaguely humanoid shape, both of which could arguably be features that, when gigantified, is that a word, can create a very frightening image. See Man-Bat from the Batman animated series and Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Again, that latter case is probably just because girls are scary. However, all of this leads us to the conclusion that Cthulhu isn't really a good fit for any of the 5 categories we have for the taxonomy of monsters. Noel, what the shit? Cthulhu existed since 1928. Why do I have to do this now? It's been nearly 100 years since Cthulhu was actually created. That is unnerving to find out, actually. Nevertheless, we are left here with one of what could be dozens of creatures from an author whose creature doesn't fit into our understanding of monsters. And because of this, they don't fit within our understanding of horror at large. So what's the deal? Well, if we ignore the taxonomy of monsters for a moment and just look at the criteria for horror monster, Carroll says, a monster can be defined as any being which is both threatening and impure. Impurity can be created via category jamming, contagion, and/or disgust. We can see both of these qualities on display in the context of the story itself. As the sailors see Cthulhu emerge from the too small doorway they opened, many of them go insane on the spot. Some of them faint. Now this is important for later, but it's safe to say Cthulhu inherently violates any sense of normalcy by virtue of being so utterly disgusting that merely looking at it is threatening, since it will be basically disintegrating your brain on contact. However, Cthulhu isn't even 1/100th or 1/1000th the size of some of these other Lovecraftian creatures. So while it does have the capacity to warp space and or time, since it emerged from a space simultaneously too small and too large on an island teeming with non-Euclidean shapes, it doesn't seem to be nearly large enough to fit into the too big category I brought up from earlier as being nearly integral to cosmic horror. What gives? Have I been riffing this whole time, and has this entire project been a sham? What do we do now? Well, it's time for another poorly formed segue. Now, I studied math in college. And during my college years, some of the biggest science and mathematics YouTube channels started popping up. Numberphile, 3 Blue 1 Brown, Stand Up Maths, Vsauce, and something that most, if not all, of these channels discussed at one point or another is infinity. Infinity, conceptually, is pretty easy to grapple with. It's forever, it's everything, it's all of it. So what? What's the big deal? Well, humans don't get infinity. The concept is simple on the surface. Because it's so erroneously large, it completely eclipses our ability to understand it. The idea of infinity is only meaningfully understood when we look at something that is finite, but is also suitably huge. Let's talk briefly about Graham's number. To introduce this, we're going to start with a very simple number. We're going to start with 3. And to show in a more dynamic way, let's just throw a unit onto this too. Let's say 3 inches. 3 inches. So we all know the basic operations of mathematics: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. To reach Graham's number, we need arrow notation. Now, arrow notation is simple on the surface. It simply represents something put to the power of something else. 3 arrow 3, which is simply 3 to the power of 3, which, when you take 3 to the power of 3, you get 3 times 3, which is 9, times 3 once more, and you get 27. So with 1 arrow, we go from 3 to 27. 1 arrow. That's pretty manageable, right? So let's consider another arrow. 3 arrow arrow 3. Put simply, this is just 3 arrow 3 arrow 3, which breaks down into 3 to the 3rd power to the 3rd power, which is 27 to the 3rd power, which is 7... Is that trillion? 7 trillion? 625,597,484,987. That's pretty big. I think that goes past the tape measure here. What is that? 120 million miles? If we're going by inches? So, with simply 1 additional arrow, we have gone from a manageable 27 to a completely insane 7.6 trillion. We haven't gotten to Graham's number yet. But consider 3 arrow 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 3, or 7.6 trillion to the 3rd power. I would be hard-pressed to find a calculator that could do that math. But suffice to say, it's a big number. Now, infinity is bigger than that number. And that wasn't even Graham's number. Graham's number is so ungodly large that it makes that 7.6 trillion to the 3rd power number look positively puny. And Even further, infinity makes Graham's number basically 0. Now look, I just rehashed an entire number file video, but here's the point. Graham's number is represented by a tiny scribble on a paper, but conceptually, it is impossible for us to physically store it in our mind. Information can be measured and weighed. It takes up space. And were there any of us to actually store Graham's number in our mind, you'll quickly find out that it would collapse into a black hole. Seriously. That is the scale we're working with in regards to the cosmic horror mythos. The elder gods and great old ones, which are, in a way, bigger than Graham's number in their own right. But the fact we can discuss all of this, the fact we are commenting and at least conceptually engaging with Graham's number and other suitably large things, means there's some kind of disconnect. Our minds are not meant to fully grapple with things that large because we aren't things that large, and we don't have things that large that we have to deal with. Yes, there are astral bodies like Betelgeuse, the star, not the man, but we don't interact with it in a way that our brains were evolved to do. From an evolutionary perspective, our brains were developed to assess and problem solve for things that we had to deal with on our planet. Things that were large would be things like hippos and elephants and cartoonishly, precariously perched boulders on top of hills and other big things. But there's nothing on Earth that compares to the size of Graham's number. Not physically, at least. Something I further believe reinforces this idea is some of those pop culture cool phobias like thalassophobia or megalophobia. The fear of big fucking things. I'd argue that because of our inability to conceptualize large numbers, we can't fully grasp the scope of overwhelming magnitude from words. So phobias like thalassophobia and megalophobia only really expose themselves in moments where we are confronted visually. And I would bet that some fears like those are far more relatable once exposed to something truly massive. What did Jacob Geller say in that one video? Lizard brain fear? A sense of nope so instinctual there's no need to introduce it? This leaves us with a question then. Why do we even read Lovecraftian stories? Given we can't grasp the sheer magnitude of some of the greater horrors of it, and given that we don't understand our cosmic insignificance therein, suppose I'm right, which I am, and we literally can't grasp some of the things in the Lovecraftian mythos, what then? What about cosmic horror entices us to want to read it? The horrors described in the pages of those books aren't real, so there isn't a secretly hidden truth of some ancient infinite being for us to uncover. So we can't actually get a taste of the cosmic smallness. We don't understand it. However, for those unfortunate characters in the Lovecraftian stories, the secrets, the unfathomable horrors, are very real. So, the title of the last section was called Let's Talk Scale. I didn't actually introduce the title. That's fine. I didn't want this video to be coherent anyway. Part 3, Fact and Fiction. I'm in the middle of all these reshoots and I haven't drank any water. When you're playing a game or reading a book or watching a movie, occasionally you'll drift into a deeper state of investment where the outside world, the real world, falls away. You become immersed. You feel not as one with the protagonist, but you might lose your sense of self or lose an awareness of yourself for a brief amount of time while engaging with the story. It's a point where you're so engrossed that you don't notice yourself turning the pages or when the scene switches, in the same way that you don't notice yourself breathing moment to moment. Sorry. Here's my claim. You and the fictional character you are reading about or watching are different. Thank you, please. Thank you. Hold your applause. I am very smart. I appreciate it. No, but seriously, you and the protagonist of your classic Lovecraftian story are distinct entities, meaning you want something different from that of your protagonist. Think about it. In any standard adventure story you read, you want the characters to succeed. You want to see Samwise and Frodo save the day. You get excited when Gandalf crests the hill above Helm's Deep and shines like the morning sun. You like when Aragorn affirms his right as the King of Gondor. But let me ask you this. If you could cut out the middle section, the conflict or contrivance that keeps the characters from achieving their goal, would you? The reason why the eagles didn't fly the hobbits to Mordor is because that's not compelling. No one would read a story where the heroes didn't struggle and heroically drop off their DVD ring at the local Mount Doom store. We as readers or watchers of this story are in it for the conflict and the resolution, not just the resolution. Okay, realistically, what I'm describing here is once again basically outlined by Noel Carroll as art horror versus actual horror, but just let me cook. Let me cook for a minute, a little bit longer. Don't look at the time code. Now, that means our interests are separate from the characters. Insert yourself into the role of Frodo for a moment. You get saddled with a cursed weapon of magical destruction, and what, you have to walk to the volcano across the country? Hell no. Where's the birds? Where are my eagles? I want to get this shit done now, ASAP. And herein lies my point. Readers and characters are in it for different reasons. Readers want to see a satisfying journey to the destination, while characters want the most expedient path. Of course, Frodo doesn't want to struggle. Struggle sucks. But Frodo doesn't have a choice. Frodo must struggle. For us. For our enjoyment, for our consumption. And so it is that every Lovecraftian protagonist must too suffer for us. While we here on planet Earth do not have elder gods or great old ones to discover that we're currently aware of, we do have these stories. And in such stories, those things exist, waiting in the dark corners of libraries or behind locked doors of studies. Since we cannot discover them, we write, and we read, and we watch characters discover them. Their plight becomes our fictitious next meal that we can slurp up and enjoy. Yum, yum, yum. From the perspective of a reader, we are reading to see what happens. We're reading the fuck around so we too can find out, albeit from the safety of our cozy reading chair. But why do the characters in these stories chase after madness? Well, on a meta level again, characters are only curious because the writers make them curious. It's once again because we control them and make them dance to play with things beyond their comprehension. But there's a similarity here too. Both characters and readers have a morbid curiosity. The characters look to understand and maybe even to comfort themselves that everything is okay. Maybe they find out that there isn't an eldritch thing in the shadows, only to find out that, oh, so much is wrong. We readers, though, look to be entertained. Now, there's been research about this idea. It's possibly because readers actually seek comfort in normalcy by contrasting their life with the characters. It's possible we delve into the horror to confront things that scare us so we can seek to overcome our actual fears. But how much comfort can we take in a thing before it becomes obsessive? How many tragic discoveries do we read about before it becomes addicting? Part 4. The Call to Madness. It's important to take a brief pause here to clarify some terms I've been using up to now, namely madness. When I say this or similar terms, I'm talking more along the lines of fantasy madness, which, while based on things from genuine history, has a distinctly less charged use to it. I did do a very based, very thorough, very good research video where I fake a British accent and pretend how to have a different facial structure, and that's over here. Now moving on. What draws one to the Eldritch? In a classic Lovecraftian story, it's knowledge or curiosity. The desire to know something, to grasp at otherwise unknowable and unattainable knowledge. And I think in a grander sense, that is what true cosmic horror means. You see, it isn't the fear of smallness or understanding that you're insignificant. Those are trappings of cosmic horror. They are not what's at its core. At least not to me, who is right. They are to cosmic horror what squids and tentacles are to the word Lovecraftian. True cosmic horror is the pursuit of the unknowable. We even have that one banger Lovecraft quote about mankind straining their intelligence or whatever. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday, the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation, or flee from the light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. It was a good quote, and I think any genuine fan who has consumed a lot of cosmic horror media has felt that pull. The subtle wonder when a character starts to look deeper into a mystery or unknown thing. We, the cosmic horror enjoyers, watch on and think, ooh, what spookity bullshit lieth in here, as the unwitting protagonist gets closer and closer to something. Probably their death. But something else too. But what unknowable thing are we pursuing as the audience? What unknowable thing are we watching the protagonist chase? What is it that we feel the urge to know? And I think the answer to this is insanity. We, pursuing through our consumption of the media, are chasing after madness. This is unquestionably the truest form of cosmic horror. We have seen the uniqueness of cosmic horror creatures, how they eschew normal horror categorizing. Thus, we know that creatures don't convey a familiar type of horror to us. A normal horror that would pique our interest in that way is not present. However, we have seen that minds cannot properly judge what creatures are there, how the size and scope and vastness of creatures, the magnitude of them, far outweigh our ability to comprehend. So not even their scale can truly scare us. Therefore, we know they can't scare us in a way we understand. They defy convention and reason, so what then is left but madness? What else could it be but an attempt to vicariously live through those characters trapped within a cosmic horror story? There's a delightful psych study in which a phrase was created to name this wholly strange compulsion to know: the Pandora effect. A deep-seated desire to know what lies behind the closed door with the sign saying, "Do not open." And what other stories best exemplify this exact feeling than cosmic horror ones? There's a great quote from YouTuber Sam, aka Ristic Studies, in his video, which I mentioned earlier, The Blind Eternities, wherein he describes metaphysics in the most wonderfully succinct way possible. What is there, and what is it like? We see madness in this same way. We see insanity in a protagonist and think, what is it like? But how does one portray insanity? Well, looking at Bloodborne for a moment, you'll see one of the more common tropes in Eldritch media: seeing. Bloodborne has the Winter Lanterns, which build up your frenzy meter by just looking at them until it fills all the way up and... The number of times I've seen a protagonist fall into the trap of taking a simple peek at some inhuman visage and have their eyes go wild, maybe even start to bleed, maybe even explode out of their head is uncountably high. It's downright expected that in a video game with an insanity effect, that your character's vision warps or bends or swims when you look at the creature. Lovecraft said it himself: to behold such a creature would drive any man to the brink of madness, and that portrayal is something we, as fans of this genre, crave. There's two things about Winter Lanterns that I love and hate. Two things, one that I love and one that I hate. What I love is the simplicity with which it conveys the experience of witnessing this creature. Once again, as it is with Cthulhu stories, here we see that the mere sight of this creature begins to flambe your frontal lobe. It conveys a lot by showing you a little. On the flip side, what I hate about it is that same simplicity. There's no conveyance to me as a player. What is so horrifying about this creature that my brain starts to break at the mere sight of it? And yeah, you can argue, well, it eschews the human form, or you can't comprehend the creature, imagine seeing it in real life, or whatever. But the fact is, it's not real. It's not real life. It will never be real life. It's a brain-eyed bouquet of madness. Of course it's not real. I'm playing a video game, and the innate reaction I have to that creature is, oh shit, I'm gonna die, which is decidedly not cosmic horror. Fear of death? That is bog standard, my man, and I just want to remind you that I love Bloodborne, and I love the Winter Lanterns. But my point about this is, you aren't experiencing what your little guy is experiencing in the video game. You aren't burbling crazy near shitting yourself. You're fighting it. You duck back, recoup your sanity, then jump out to cut the thing down. The only anxiety you have as a player is stay alive, stay alive, stay alive, stay alive, stay alive. And if you are a cosmic horror fan, you know darn well that survival instinct is a facet of cosmic horror, and not the crux of it. It's the tentacle thing again. A piece of the puzzle, and not a core component of the genre. And I get it, it's hard to keep that sort of cosmic smallness / fear vibe in a From Software game, where you slowly become incredibly powerful. Of course you wouldn't be scared of the creature. In any From Software game, there's never been a simple mook you couldn't cut down, at least not one that are very memorable, and that's intentional. You're supposed to beat the baddies in those games. They're action RPGs. But, there is another game, one that isn't an action RPG, that has, in my opinion, which is correct, the perfect depiction of madness. Signalis. Yes, I'm talking about Signalis again. What are you going to do, stop me? Signalis is one of my favorite games of all time. It's quiet. It's slow-paced, but not sluggish in feeling. And right out of the gate, the game imbues a sense of dread anticipation. I can't outright say cosmic dread, at least not yet. From just the intro, though, there isn't enough information to call it out. But as a cosmic horror fan, you feel it. Maybe it's the quote from Lovecraft at the beginning. Maybe it's the soft piano playing gently as the flesh erodes on a vision of the main character's face. You can feel the drip, drip, drip from the slow bleed of cosmic horror being built in front of you. The vibe is right. Now, more specifically, what Signalis does that I think captures the pure experience of madness and cosmic horror is, well, this. And this. These are, in a strict game design sense, cutscenes, at least for the most part. These stand out against the cutscenes from a lot of other games because of the fact that continuity of the world is changed. See, traditional cutscenes in video games, yes, I'm explaining this to you in 2024, have a sort of unspoken rule of continuity, much like film and television, and for good reason. Breaking that continuity is a sort of violation in our understanding of the chain of events that is happening. And when that rule is broken, things get very confusing very quickly. But in Signalis, this is an asset. The breaking of continuity, this violation of the rule, is what I think creates the fundamental spice of cosmic horror. Look at the scene again. The lead up, the cutscene itself, and the aftermath. This scene depicts Elster traveling to the desert. It shows her fighting off guy whose name I can't remember, God help me. And then she proceeds to walk into the desert. And then it jumps to paintings. Is she remembering these? Are these images flashing through Elster's mind because of some aggravated memory in her latent Gestalt consciousness? Or are they being put there? What is actually happening to Elster? What is Elster actually doing? What does reality look like in this moment? I think cosmic horror here lies within the sheer what the fuck is happening feeling of scenes like this. If there was a way to remove our perspective from Elster and view the scene objectively, what would it look like? Well, there's no way to know. And being unable to correlate and parse different facts of our experience with that of Elster's makes this a tangled Gordian knot of madness that just... perfect. That is what cosmic horror is. To us, the inability to grasp what is and is not real, the separation of experience from fundamental truth. Did we walk into the desert? Did we actually jump into a lake? What is and is not are melted down and handed back to us from the shattered mind we used to have, presented as what might be. And there's no greater beauty than the horror of not knowing anything. Cosmic horror isn't just about being cosmically insignificant. That, like tentacles, can be part of it, but it is not the core of the fear. The core of the fear, as I see it, is the distance created between what you understand is true as an enjoyer and consumer of the horror, and what is true in terms of the narrative. It is less cosmic smallness and more cosmic gaslighting. You are shown a series of events either done by you as the video game player or seen by characters in the media. But the horror is when the things have transpired are thrown into nightmarish limbos of, wait, did I do that? Did that happen? Am I imagining things? Part 5. The darker side of reality. I don't want to trivialize or sensationalize the following topics, but I think it's important to cover them. While we can never truly know what it's like to stare into the eldritch maw of a star spawn of Cthulhu, there are real elements of madness we can talk about. I want to make it abundantly clear, though, that madness and such I talk about here is not portraying the person who has gone mad as a perpetrator of violence. No. Unlike films such as Psycho or Halloween, the madness that I'm discussing here is madness that is inflicted upon someone, rather than someone driven to violence because of inherent madness or psychological issues. If you want to hear more on this topic, I highly recommend a Renegade Cuts video on it. Now, what does madness look like? It's hard to say, but I know what it sounds like. The Caretaker was a long-running project by British musician Leyland Kirby. This project spans multiple years in various thematic tones, but the tail end of this project is what speaks to me the most, and has in recent years garnered a lot of attention. It's an hours-long music album called Everywhere at the End of Time. The project itself is an attempt to bring the very real disease of dementia into an auditory experience, and it succeeds. The album evokes the familiar and the uncanny over the course of several real hours, all the while slowly but subtly changing. I can't play it all here, but if you want to feel your heart and mind melt, the entire album is readily available online. And while I can't speak to Kirby's true motivation with this project, I can speak to the intensity of the album. Each song in the first part of the album resonates like the music is being played at the end of an airplane hangar, far away, but not so far that you can't make out the distant, slow melodies. Each subsequent part of the album reintroduces the prior part, only with the steady decay that comes with dementia. It is truly a brutal listen. One of the most painful and apt depictions of this real-world madness can be seen in a video from the YouTube channel Ugly Edits, which has a mashup of the episode Time's Arrow from Season 6 of BoJack Horseman. These scenes are interspersed with a series of songs from everywhere at the end of time. In the episode, we follow Beatrice Horseman, BoJack's mother, as she fades from the present moment to her childhood, to her adolescence, and to her adulthood. She is never quite able to find her footing in any one moment, as just before she's finally able to grasp some part of her surroundings, it changes right out from underneath her. The disease is uncompromising, and there is seemingly no break in sight right up until the end of the episode, where, in a beautiful moment of serenity, things snap into focus long enough that she's able to speak with BoJack, her son, as he is now in the present. The video punctuates this moment by letting us revisit an earlier part of the album, a reminder of the peace we had before all this set in. While BoJack's parting words aren't a cure, they do provide a bit of rest to both Beatrice and the audience. I really love this video. Is that the key, though? Is madness something actually tangible like dementia? Have all the stories we've written and played and watched just been different ways of various authors trying to impart upon us the lived experience and feeling of those who suffer from degenerative diseases or maybe mental illnesses? It's possible. At least it was for Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Gilman was a writer, a mother, and a eugenicist? No. Yeah, okay, Jesus Christ. Okay, well, thank God both she and Lovecraft are dead. I didn't intend for there to be a quick introduction to Death of the Author, but here we are. Despite her prejudices, here we have a person who wrote a piece that unflinchingly highlights some potent themes and truths about the treatment of women's symptoms by doctors and the non-existence of depression and depressive symptoms in early psychology. In 1884, Gilman suffered severely from postpartum depression. At the time, her doctor, Dr. Mitchell, gave her instructions to follow a rest cure, which entails, essentially, doing nothing. Resting, no outdoor activity or strenuous movement, but also no creativity, as Dr. Mitchell explicitly said, live as domestic a life as possible, have your child with you at all time, lie down an hour after each meal, but have 2 hours of intellectual life a day, and never touch a pen, brush, or pencil as long as you live. It is nigh torturous to me to imagine being trapped with no ability to stimulate your mind while also having to child rear. The Yellow Wallpaper is a short story, inspired by Gilman's own experiences with the rest cure that she wrote. The story existed far before the idea of mental health had gained any ground in academic circles, and Gilman shows us this in an unflinching way. While the story isn't a one-to-one, the events of the Yellow Wallpaper are a grim reflection of her lived reality. The story of the Yellow Wallpaper begins with the point of view character having been diagnosed with hysteria and given rest treatment as a curative solution. Gilman, effectively sentenced with housewife for weeks for similar reasons, was forbidden from touching any writing utensils and only given 2 hours for creative time, while still following under the forbiddance of said writing utensils. And she lived in this very vapid and empty hell. The torture and suffering of being silent and still. Gilman's story stands as a haunting testament to the depths of the human psyche and the harrowing consequences of societal ignorance. In this masterwork, madness is not merely a thematic tool or thing that we chase, it is the protagonist, a silent specter lurking within the walls of the secluded Victorian mansion with which she was sentenced to live. Through the eyes of the unnamed narrator, we bear witness to the gradual descent into madness, spurned by the oppressive confines of domesticity and the insidious patterns of the titular wallpaper. Gilman's narrative unfolds with a creeping unease, mirroring the protagonist's unraveling sanity as she becomes increasingly fixated on the wallpaper's shifting patterns. The story, crafted with meticulous detail and psychological acuity, serves as a poignant indictment of the patriarchal norms that ensnared Gilman herself. Like her protagonist, Gilman grappled with mental anguish, a victim of the era's prevailing beliefs about women's inferiority in domestic roles. The yellow wallpaper was her attempt to shed a light on the detrimental effects of rest cure prescribed by physicians at the time, a treatment that only exacerbated her own condition. She even sent a copy of this story to Dr. Mitchell. Now, Gilman told this tale in the hope that it might reach other women who have suffered similar circumstances, but unfortunately the story failed to reach the heights it did now during the time. Gilman, however, would go on to inspire other, less overtly racist writers to take up the pen and share more tales of madness and trauma, such as Sylvia Plath. While we societally still have issues ignoring struggles and recognizing things for women, and indeed men too, for both loneliness and desperation and depression, the desperate and isolated who have been pushed to the brink of madness as a result of societal seclusion, tales like The Yellow Wallpaper act as a dark mirror held up to society's failings, a testament to enduring struggle for understanding and empathy and acceptance in the realm of mental health. Part 6. The end? We got a little sidetracked there, but back on topic. Cosmic horror. So that's it then, right? Cosmic horror, at its core, is the pursuit of vicarious madness. And madness is, in part, an attempt to convey a pervasive sense of wrongness of being unheard. It is a lonely place. A place where unquestioning reality and being gaslit into understanding what is and is not real are thrown onto you like shackles. I don't know that every cosmic horror story falls into this idea. But what I do know is that cosmic horror isn't just about being cosmically insignificant. What I do know is that I will keep reading and enjoying cosmic horror, and I will keep chasing after whatever sense of vicarious madness. What I do know is that I don't know what's out there, but I want to know. Ow, my fucking knees. Hello! Thank you for making it through the video. I appreciate it immensely. You have no idea. Also, I got a haircut. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I would appreciate it ever so much if you were to like, subscribe, ring the bell, all the notification positive things, you know. I plan on making another video in the future and continuing to do so when I have free time. It's fun. And thank you to Zero the Thinker. He was the editor for this video, and I would love to have him do more of my stuff. He's great. Go check him out at his resource here. But I hope to see you all in the next video in the future, whenever that may be. And make sure that you all drink water and stay hydrated, because it is a hot summer. So, yeah, thank you.